Tonight, I am joined by not only my colleague Glenn from APRA AMCOS, but of course we have Andrea Szew, who is a US immigration attorney. Andrea is the founder and managing director of Szew Law Group, which she started in 2002. She has over 20 years of experience in securing hundreds of visas for musicians and artists from all around the world. And I'm so pleased that she's been able to join us here tonight to talk us through the process of applying for and actually obtaining the O visa to go and work and perform in the USA. So Andrea is passionate about travel and culture, and I assume music, so making her just the perfect person to speak with us this evening. As we go through the presentation, if you've got any questions, please note that there is a Q&A facility at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So put any of your questions in a text format in there. Glenn and I will be here, cameras off in the background, and if we can answer them, we will. But Andrea has left lots of time to answer questions live at the end, which I suspect we will need. So pop your questions in there and we will probably get to them towards the end of the webinar. So thank you again, and Andrea, over to you.
All righty. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for letting me do this with you tonight, or for me tonight, for you afternoon. I am going to switch over to my PowerPoint here, and I'm going to, hold on, I have to share my screen. So technical difficulties here. One second, everybody.
We tested this. It all worked perfectly.
It all went perfect. And
there we go.
There we go. It just takes me like a split second to get that technical side of my brain going. All right, everybody. So thank you again for having me tonight. Well, today. I feel honored always to do anything with APRA AMCOS. I've been working with APRA AMCOS for years. So I find it a special treat for me to be able to come and speak to all of you. I wish I was there in person, because this whole digital thing is kind of strange still, even after all that's gone on, but it is making it very convenient to be able to reach all of you, even though I'm sitting in the US and you're probably all in Australia. So let's do this. We're going to demystify the US visas in less than an hour, which is a big feat, but we're going to do it. And I really tried hard to make this webinar not boring, and not just going through criteria after criteria that a lot of you might already know. What I thought was more beneficial to all of you is to take the most interesting and most pressing questions I've gotten over the years with regard to artist visas and actually give you those answers. Some of them you probably never heard, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I never even thought of that question. And some of them are going to be like, oh yeah, I already know that answer, or I didn't know that was the answer to that question. So we're going to go through all these questions. Some of them will be a surprise, some of them won't be. At the end of the webinar, I'm going to give you a coupon code and everything for a O visa workshop that I created. It's super helpful, it's super inexpensive, and I'm going to give you even a discount on it because you guys are APRA AMCOS and you deserve a discount on everything. And it basically, that workshop walks you through in detail. I walk you through step by step the criteria for getting an O visa. You'll know everything you ever wanted to know about the criteria and qualifying for an O visa. So I'm not going to talk about the specific criteria in this webinar. I'm going to focus on all those esoteric questions and important questions that you need to know once you figure out I qualify for the O visa. Okay, so let's go on. And I am going to try really hard, like I said, not to make you look like this at the end of my webinar. Hopefully you'll be wide awake and you'll be taking notes and you'll get a lot of good information. So let's start. So we're going to start with what are the visas that are available to artists. We have two types of visas. Now, there are sometimes exceptions, obviously, to getting visas to come to the United States as an artist. We're going to talk about them a little bit more in depth later, but there's very few. If you're an amateur, you don't necessarily need a work visa to come perform in the United States. If you are coming to perform in a cultural performance that's being paid for by your home country, you don't necessarily need a work visa to come to the US, but 99% of the time, you need a work visa to come to the US. And you're going to choose between one of these two. It's either the P visa or the O visa. The P visa is a visa for performing groups. It's for groups of performers, either bands or groups of performers like Cirque du Soleil that use this P visa. And it's for groups that are recognized internationally as outstanding. Okay. The O visa, on the other hand, which is the other option, is a visa for individuals, not groups. So it's for people at the top of their industry, artists, as what we're talking about today, artists that are at the top of their industry. So you have the P visa and the O visa, and those are mainly the two that we're going to deal with today, and the two that are really your options when you're thinking of coming to work in the US as any kind of artist, a writer, a producer, performer, whatever you're going to do, you would probably use one of these two. So what is exactly considered a performing group? Like you say, oh, a P is for a performing group, but what does that mean? What is a performing group? Well, a performing group is any group of people that if you hear their name, you think of the group. I mean, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it kind of works when you think about it. So I'm old, so I'm going to use an example of like U2. I always use U2 because I love U2 and I'm old. So if you think of U2, you think of U2. You don't think of necessarily Bono and the three people in U2. You just think of U2 as a group. So you think of Cirque du Soleil as a group. So when you think of what is a performing group for P purposes, you're going to think of it that way. That when I think of a group, am I a group? Am I part of a group or is it an individual? The other thing you want to remember, though, is a performing group does not have to be all four nationals, because sometimes we have a performing group that has, let's say, 4 US citizens and 1 Australian or from another country. That can still be applied for under a P because the group is applying. And when you list the members, it's going to have the 3 US citizens or the 4 US citizens and then the 1 national from another country. And that national from another country is the one who needs the visa, but it still qualifies under going with a P visa. So just be clear that it's not always what you think it is, and it could be a combination of a different types of people that are coming in to be under the P. So what's easier to get? People always ask me, what is easier to get? Should I get an O or a P? Well, if you have the luxury of deciding between an O or a P, the P is really usually the easier one, but not always. So let's look at the O versus the P and look at what are the benefits or what are the strong points with doing an O versus doing a P, because sometimes you'll be surprised, and I'll go through it with you. Sometimes you might be able to do an O even though you're a group. So let's see how this works. So the O visa, you get 3 years on an O. A P, you only get 1. So that is a benefit of doing an O. You get 3 years, up to 3 years, I should say, on an O. You only can get 1 year at a time on a P. The flexibility of an O. The O allows for a little bit more flexibility with regard to performing groups. For example, if you have a performing group that maybe has only been together 6 months, a year, 2 years, and they're not really internationally recognized as outstanding yet, but they're doing well, they wouldn't necessarily be able to qualify for the P. But maybe someone in their group is going to qualify for an O. So if someone in the group is extraordinary or meets the level of standard for an O visa, that person can get the O, and then the band members can get O2s, can get the dependents of the O1. So if you do it that way, it allows for a lot more flexibility. And we do these kinds of things to help bands that maybe have not been in existence, don't have that outstandingness yet, or we do it the other way around sometimes. So that's another benefit of an O. It's cost effective, just because if you do the numbers, if you only have to apply once every 3 years, or you get 3 years, it's more bang for your buck, right? So you're getting more years for the cost of doing the visa. A P, you got to do every year, you got to renew it. And an O has a path to a green card. So there is a path from an O visa to a green card, not automatic, like you don't automatically get the green card when you have an O, but if you qualify for an O as being extraordinary, then that means that you could possibly be extraordinary enough to get a green card, a permanent resident card. So that is a really nice thing. And in that workshop that you can get at the end, if you would like, in the workshop, I actually have one of the lessons is how do you take an O visa to a green card. So I explain in depth, like what are the criteria, the difference between the two, and how do you get from a O visa to a green card. Okay, let's talk about the P visa. So the P visa is a group versus an individual. So the pressure is not on that one person needs to qualify, because we're looking at the group's reputation internationally, not an individual person's reputation. So that could be considered easier. Less to prove. So a P, it's not that there's less to prove, it's that there's less evidence, in my opinion, that you have to present to immigration in order to qualify. You still have to present enough to reach to the level of being considered outstanding internationally and recognized that way internationally. But it's not to the level of an extraordinary ability visa, an O visa, that you really have to lay out criteria by criteria by criteria and show specific evidence of, you know, your eligibility and for each of the criteria like you do in an O. A P is a little bit more generalized and looking more at like general media, maybe letters. It's a little bit more generalized. So it's not as detailed as an O visa. And the one great benefit about the P visa is that you get to swap out members. So with a P visa, unlike an O, you apply for the P visa. You have a group, let's say, of 4 people. You apply for the visa, and then your drummer decides, oh, I can't go. I have other plans. I can't make it on that trip. Well, the benefit of a P visa is that you can then swap out that person that was approved on that petition, and someone else can pick up that visa instead of the original person that was listed. But you have to know that on a P visa, the members have to be with the group. 75% of the members have to be with the group at least a year. So if you have swapping out someone that hasn't been with the group for at least a year, then that's your 25%. So you can't do any more. I'm talking about if you have a band of 4. So that is a huge benefit, especially if you have a larger group, that you can make those swaps if you need to, and you don't have to stress about it. Someone gets sick or someone this. The only trick is you have to remember that you have to swap them out before anyone picks up the visa. So you can't really say, oh, the last minute, oh, he got sick, but he already picked up his visa. Now I'm going to go in and get his visa, because it's already been issued. The consulate won't reissue a new visa for that particular person. So you have to plan a little bit ahead. All right, what about my crew, band members, managers, all these other people? Like, what do I do with all that? Because now we've talked about the individuals. Now, what do I do with all these people? Well, support personnel, your crew, your technical people, your manager, your whoever, the support personnel are going to be on an O and a P. They're going to attach as support personnel. So in an O, they would be O2s. They come in under the O1 on a separate petition. And the Ps, they come in as P1Ss underneath the group on a separate petition. But band members, P visas, the band is clearly part of the group. So you don't need a separate application for them, because everyone in the group will be under one application. But the band members under the O visa would come in under support. So they would not be O1s, they would be the O2s. They would be the support for the O1. Like we talked about before, that if the O1 is in the band and then they have other band members, they bring them in. Sometimes you have an individual artist, a lot of times you have an individual artist that uses different different drummers or different other musicians that they work with that are not necessarily part of a group. They're just the drummer that they want to use or the musicians they want to use. So they bring them in as support. All right, next question I get all the time is, can I file an O or P visa by myself? I'm not talking about by myself, meaning that do you go and you file it and you put it in the mail and you put it together. I'm talking about by yourself, meaning you don't need a US petitioner. You don't need someone in the US to file for you. And the answer to that question is absolutely no. You can't file it by yourself. You can file an O that turns into a green card. So an extraordinary ability green card application, which is the green card version of the O visa, that actually can be self-petitioned. You can petition by yourself without a US petitioner. But you have to be that extraordinary, right? You got to be able to have work without having any petitioner in the US. Who can I use as my petitioner in the US, which is the natural next question. So if I have to have a petitioner, who can I use in the US? A very good question, and a question I get all the time, because a lot of people don't have the connection to someone in the US. But let's go through the different options you can use for a petitioner in the US. A petitioner would be the person who files the petition. So it's the person who actually fills out the forms, and is basically your face to immigration when you come to the US. The person or the company that says, I am filing this on behalf of X artist. That is the petitioner. So the first option is a US employer. And I know I'm using the word employer, even though it's a weird word sometimes used with artists or with some industries, because you don't really have an employer. But we're just going to use employer. Employer is going to stand for manager, booking agent, whoever is going to be the person that you are going to be working for and being paid by when you're in the United States. So you can have a single US employer. So if you're going to have one point of contact, one entity or person you're going to be working with or for in the United States that will be paying you and will be filing your petition on your behalf, then that is one US employer, and that person or that company will file the petition for you. Okay, that's one option. The second option is to have a US agent representative, and then you have multiple employers. So for this one, you would need a US person. Doesn't have to be a formal agency or fancy management company. It can literally be anybody in the US that's a US citizen, anyone in the US that's willing to file this for you. And I always tell my clients, don't pick someone that kind of makes sense. Like, don't pick someone that's like a history professor at a university. You want to pick someone in the industry, maybe, that has some connection, just so when they do a cover letter, they can kind of say, their experience in the industry. It's not required, but it kind of makes sense. And I always suggest that happens. But anyway, you get a US agent or representative, and then that allows you to then go out and work for multiple places, people, venues, whatever you're going to do. So that would look something like this. Let's say I'm your agent, or I'm a musician or whatever in the US, and I just say, oh, sure, I'll be your agent. I'm your agent. I filed the petition for you, but you have to go and get agreements with whoever you're going to work with. So you have to provide those agreements with the petition, because the only way you'll be able to allow to work for multiple employers is if you have work proven for multiple places, right? You can't just say, oh, I'm going to work for a lot of people, but you have no proof of it. So you have to do it. So let's say you're going to do a tour and you're going to work individually at maybe 5 or 6 different venues on top of the tour. So you have your booking agent, you have your different venues that you're going to do touring at. Maybe you're going to do some recording. Maybe you're going to do some writing. Maybe you're going to do a collaboration, and you have agreements for all these different things. And that's fine. So you have your individual agent representative who's going to file the petition on behalf of all these other employers. So the agreements you have with all these other employers will have on the bottom language that says, I authorize X agent to file on our behalf so we can work with X artist in the United States. Now, one thing you have to know too is that agent representative can also be an employer. Like you could have a licensing deal with someone and they say, no, we'll just be also your agent representative. Like, they don't care. If you want to work for other people, that's fine. And it could also be employers. So then you'll have an agent relationship with them, plus you'll have an employment agreement with them, because you're going to be doing both with them, along with the employment agreements from everyone else. Just remember, if you do this option, you have to have more than one employment agreement or work agreement. They're not going to let you do that unless you have more than one already to begin with. Okay. The next option is one that a lot of people don't know about. And I think it's great. And it says, can your foreign employer be a petitioner? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. A foreign employer can be your petitioner. And by foreign employer, I'm talking about most of the time it's going to be your manager in Australia, or maybe you already have someone in Australia working with, a company you're already working with and you're signed with. It could be anyone, and it's someone outside the United States that you already have a relationship with and a work agreement with that wants to be your employer, which then would in turn be pseudo petitioner in the US. And this is how it looks. Okay, so this is how it works. You're sitting in Australia, let's say. You have your foreign manager, your manager in Australia that you work for. You already have an agreement with them. They've been managing for a while. And they say, we want you to go to the United States to do some work for us. Or we want you to go to the United States. I mean, not for us, but once you go to the US to do some work. So then the foreign employer goes to a US agent, again, anybody, that makes sense, and says, hey, I have an artist that I want to bring to the US to do this tour. Can you please be our petitioner? And then that US agent petitioner would say, sure, I'll be your petitioner. They file the petition on the foreign employer's behalf for you, because it goes like 3 steps. And then once that gets approved, you come in the US to work. So it's pretty amazing. And it's really, really convenient when you don't have that solid connection to any label or anyone in the US that you need to use in order to get the petitioner in the US. So if you have a strong relationship with a foreign employer and that foreign employer has a very strong relationship with people or entities in the US, you can take advantage of that. And then the foreign employer basically will continue doing what he always does, and they'll just pay you through the management company in Australia. All right. Next, so what's better? Everyone's like, what's better? Should I do one employer or should I do lots of employers? Well, lots of employers is always better. And the reason for that is because the more employers you have, the more work you can really kind of add. So it looks like this. If I file a petition and I'm going to be performing at 6 venues, and I'm also I'm going to be doing a collaboration with another artist, or I'm going to be writing also while I'm here. So if I do multiple employers, it gives me the flexibility to then, if another venue comes to me and says, can you perform, in 2 weeks, we would love you to perform, you can go and do that. If you're working only with one individual petitioner, then everything has to go through that petitioner. It can't go to you and you make the decision and sign an agreement with that other venue or whatever would come across your table. It would only be able to go through that one petitioner. So it it could be a very easy relationship with that petitioner, or it could be a little bit more structured and not so flexible. So if you have multiple employers, it just gives you the flexibility to add in more work and do more different things that you couldn't really do as easily if you had only one petitioner and one employer. So what's better? In my opinion, multiple. But there's a lot of situations where one might just be the way it goes, and maybe the next you switch to doing multiple because it works better. The famous question, right? Do I really need work in the US before I apply for the visa? Because that whole chicken and egg kind of a thing, it's like, how in the world am I supposed to get work if I don't have a visa? And how am I supposed to get a visa if I don't have work? Well, yes, you absolutely need work in the US before you can apply for the visa, for the O or the P. Immigration is very, very strict with this. You have to have work. The movie and television industry has gotten really strict with this, with the type of work you have to show them. But yes, absolutely, you have to have work in the US before you can apply for your visa. And you will only get the amount of time approved for the period that you have work lined up. So be aware that, not only do you need work in the US, but they're only going to give you, the time period of the visa is going to reflect how much, the work you have. So if you only have 2 gigs lined up, or you're only coming to write, and collaborate for 2 months, you can't get a 3-year O visa. So people always think and tell me, well, Andrea, how am I going to do this? Because how do I book like tours and stuff like 2 years from now? That's ridiculous. Like no one books 2 years from now necessarily. Or how am I going to get work lined up for 3 years? And what I say is that, well, if you are extraordinary, if you're that extraordinary, you should be able to, probably have at least a year of book stuff. And then what you do is you can fill in with like writing, recording, collaborating, press, those kinds of things could be filled in on some of the other periods that you're not, that you don't have work. The other thing you have to remember is that you don't need to have work every single day of every single month of every single, of the whole year for 3 years. No, you can have, blocks of time. I have tons of clients that come in and do a tour for 3-4 months, and then they're going to go to Europe and do the same tour for 3-4 months. And then they're going to come back up, come back here and do some writing and maybe finish off the tour for another month. So you don't have to be here every day and have an itinerary that lists every single day something that you're doing here. They just want to make sure that it's consistent work related to what you're claiming you are extraordinary at, or that your performing group does. So it needs to be consistent work. So if there's gaps, like you go home for the holidays between December and January, you're not here, no big deal. Just make sure that it's consistent over time. But there can be gaps in the itinerary. It just has to be connected to each other, more or less. You can't just come here and start, I don't know, just dribbling, doing something crazy, something that has nothing to do with being an artist, and then, be an artist and that thing. Everything has to be connected to each other. So what do I have to provide USCIS to prove that I have work? So if I'm required to show that I have work, what in the world do I have to provide for them? What does it look like that I have to give them? Well, you will always need to give them these things. You always need an itinerary. Every petition that you file an ORP, I give them an itinerary. If you're with a single employer or a foreign employer, there's an argument that you don't necessarily need an itinerary. But after doing this for as long as I have, I always give an itinerary, because they seem to always ask when I've chosen in the past not to give them an itinerary. The itinerary will have a calendar basically on it. It has to have a list of dates, what you're going to do, where you're going to do it, how much you're going to get paid. If you're going to be just with a single booking agent, then the booking agent would just say C employment agreement, or C work agreement attached. So if you're just going to be writing, C writing. If you're just going to be producing, you're only going to be producing for one company, then that company you would say, writing and producing for X company, and some of the details of the job duties, the location of the venue where they're working, and then how much you're going to pay is C work agreement. Okay. But you have to always have an itinerary that lays out exactly what you're doing. Second, you need the work agreements. So if you're with a single employer, single petitioner, then you need one. If you're with multiple, you need multiple. And remember, if you're using a US agent or representative, make sure that at the bottom, there's always that language that says, the language that says that the petitioner, the agent, is filing on behalf of all the multiple employers. So don't forget to have that on the bottom. It's late here, you guys. I'm trying my best. It's middle night, but I'm good. Thank you for bearing with me here in the US. Okay, the next question I get, which is the question that everybody loves to talk about, at least they love to talk about with me, is can you enter the US on ESTA to perform or write even if you don't get paid? So the key here is even if I don't get paid, and I mean, that's the question I always get. So can I come to the US and perform? I have a gig I want to come do, and I'm not getting paid. Well, I tell them, stop right there, because there's two questions that we have to talk about when we talk about this question, when this question is asked. One is, what is considered being paid? Okay, that is the big question, because what you and me think is what's being paid is not what immigration thinks is being paid. Immigration thinks what is being paid is if anybody is benefiting from what you're doing, then you're getting paid. So if you're going to perform in a venue and that venue charges a cover, you're getting paid. If you go to a charity event to do something out of the goodness of your heart and you do a performance there and you don't get a penny, the charity's making money that they're going to use for a cause. You're getting paid. If you sell your merch at something, you're getting paid. So that doesn't work. What is considered being paid? It's almost everything. There's very, very, very rare circumstances that they'll say you can come here and you're not really getting paid. So what you need to remember is that almost everybody who comes here needs a visa. It's very, very rare exceptions that you can get in on ESTA without a visa. But the next question we have to look at is if we're not talking about performing, but we're talking about writing and recording. And a lot of artists will come here. A lot of you probably will come here and just say, well, I just want to write and record, or I just want to record. I'm not going to be performing. I'm not doing any of that. So can I just come in on ESTA? Well, to come here and record on ESTA or on a visitor visa, you have to be coming here exclusively to record, to use recording facilities. You cannot use the recording in the US at all. It has to be distributed solely internationally, outside the United States. And there can be no performances at all. So that's what would have to be the case if you were to come in the US to do recording without a visa, which is a very, very narrow situation. So what happens usually, what I see is this next question. What if I wrote and recorded a song in the US and then it becomes a huge hit? What happens? Because I didn't have a visa when I did it. So I decided not to get a visa. What do I do? Well, my answer to them is that, well, it puts us in a little bit of a pickle, a little bit of a situation, because what happens when we want to do the application, and we of course want to use all that media and all that backup and all that evidence to show how extraordinary you are and how you qualify for the visa, but all of that stuff says it was done in the US. And we know that you didn't have a visa, and you were supposed to have a visa because now you're distributing in the US, or you're selling in the US, or you're performing in the US. So it becomes a very, very awkward situation. Is everybody caught doing it? Absolutely not. But it puts you in a position of being exposed for doing something you should have been doing. So you can take away from this is, you know, the parameters now I just told you of how you can come and record on an ESTA or a visitor visa. But if you're going to do that, just think of the big picture before you do it. Because if you believe, which all of us should believe, that our work's going to do amazing, then make sure that you take the steps that you need to take to protect your future decisions and your future applications. So you don't do something now because you want to do it really bad and you think it's a great opportunity that's going to trump you up later in the future. Okay. The next thing I will talk about is the showcase exception, which is another thing that, you know, artists deal with all the time. Before COVID, well, let me just start with what is the showcase exception in case anyone doesn't know what it is. And I'm gonna actually read to you, because it's very important that you understand exactly what the showcase exception is, because it's not law. There's no codified law that says that there's this exception called the showcase exception. It's something that's kind of been derived out of the Foreign Affairs Manual, which is a document that the U.S. consulates abroad use to make rules. They kind of extracted this from that, and they came up with this. But basically, the showcase exception is if you are officially invited to perform at a recognized music industry showcase event, and the principal purpose that the audience is in attendance is not for the sake of being entertained, but for the sake of considering future businesses' engagements with you. Okay? So if you think about that, it's like if you're doing an audition or you're doing something in front of people that you want to get this label to sign you, or you want to get this performance booked, it's for that. So it is a very, 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 very narrow exception. And the problem comes with this exception. The big problem comes is that when you are going to use the exception, is the person that you're presenting yourself to at the border going to accept, one, even understand what the showcase exception is, because that's not always the case. And two, are they going to think that you qualify for that showcase exception? So if those two things happen, then you might get lucky enough to get in on ESTA. But if they don't, you're going to be on a plane back home. And we're going to talk about it in a second. So it's the idea that it's an exception to the rule, but even South by Southwest in the US, before COVID happened, because they had so many issues with the showcase exception at the border, started sending invitation letters to artists that were being invited for them to go book at the consulate for a visitor visa, not coming on ESTA, but a visitor visa. So when they came in, they presented a visitor visa, which then kind of relieved some of the pressure on the officers at the border, be like, okay, well, you've already explained this to a US consulate, so we're not going to interrogate you as much. And then they were letting them through. They would have the invitation letter and the visa. So there wasn't as many problems. Since COVID, it's a little bit more difficult, I know, because the waits to get visitor visas are so long. It's getting better, a lot better in Australia, but you know, the wait's still long. So people are like, well, I'm not going to wait, you know, to get a visitor visa. I'm just going to come in on ESTA. So the next question is, what if I decide not to get a visa? So someone calls me and says, Andrea, I don't want to get a visa. I'm not going to waste my time getting a visa. I think it's ridiculous. I have a million friends that came in on ESTA. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to come in on ESTA. I'm not performing. I'm not making money, you know, all those things that we all talked about. And then I say to them, okay, as long as you know the possible consequences, that's fine. But let me give you one more thing to think about. When you show up at the airport and you meet that nice officer, and you look like this. I don't know if you guys can see her, but you look like this with your guitar on your shoulder, or whatever in your hands, or you are explaining to them what you're going to be doing in the US. It is in the sole discretion of this sweet person here to make a decision if they're going to let you come in or not. And even if they're going to let you come in, they have the right to say, I don't really think you're telling me the truth. I think you're telling me the truth. I'm going to let you in, but I'm really not convinced. And I'm sure you've heard stories. I mean, I've heard millions of stories, but of these kinds of things happening. And a lot of times officers will let you in, but they give you this wonderful little flag. And it's not a literal flag you get, you don't walk out with a flag, but your actual passport number gets flagged. And it's called being flagged. And what happens is when you come in the next time, and every time after that, forever, the officer will usually interrogate you more than the average person because you've been flagged. And because you've been flagged, it means that make sure that they left when they said they were going to leave last time. Make sure that you ask them proper questions because there was a little bit of uncertainty last time, or they promised me they were going to do this, and make sure that they actually did that. There could be a million things. I have clients that were flagged and they're permanent residents and they're still getting stopped. It's very, very hard to remove the flag. I'm not saying all this to scare you at all by any stretch of imagination, but I think knowledge is power. And I think if you know the parameters and you know the worst case scenario, the consequences, you'll know which decisions to make. Moving on past that, all that stuff. Can you add, change, remove work listed on your petition after filing? Yes, absolutely. Especially if you have multiple employers, like I explained before. If you have multiple employers, you can add, remove, change, like this venue canceled on me, so I'm going to add these 3 other venues. You can even do it if you're working through a single booking agency. I mean, if the booking agency booked for you, 15, performances and 5 of them flaked or canceled or who knows what, they can add 10 more. I mean, it's fine. You can add, you can change, as long as it's within the parameters of what you were issued the visa for. So if you're issued the visa as a performing artist, or as I should say, as a producer, you can't then now all of a sudden be a performing artist. Okay, that's just relief that that's the case. What if I want to work as a writer, producer, and performer? And that's what I was just alluding to just now. Some of us out there are writers, producers, performers, we're everything. And we're amazing at all those things. So if that's the case, then just make sure you stage or you put together your application to support all those things. So you would have to prove that you are extraordinary, outstanding in writing, producing, and performing. So if you are filing for an O visa and you want to do all 3 things, make sure you put all of those things in your petition. So then when you apply that they're going to approve them. So then you're authorized to do all these things because you've been found to be extraordinary, not only as a performer, but as a producer and a writer. It also helps that you have work in all those areas too. So you could say, what I usually put on my applications when someone is a writer, producer, performer, and everything else, is that they're extraordinary as an artist. And then in the letters and everything that are writing to support you, you're going to have them talk about you as a writer, producer, performer. You're going to provide evidence under the criteria for all writing, producing, and performing. So if you're an amazing performer and you've never produced in your life, you can't really get an O visa to write and produce because you're not really extraordinary at producing. You're only extraordinary at performing. Make sense? Can I change my petitioner once approved for an O or P visa? Well, yes, but no. Yes, in the sense that yes, you can change, but no, in the sense that you're going to have to file a whole new petition. So you have to file for a whole new employer to change petitioners. So you can't just easily change from one to another. It's a whole filing. Now, if it's close to the time you filed the initial one, it's not as big of a deal because you just file exactly the same petition. You move it over, you say new employer, and then, or you change the employer, and then you change the employer. This one is a big one for me. This confused look of this woman in this slide. this is one that I think everyone probably that's on this webinar has experienced this thought, this feeling, holding this bubble above their head. And the question that everyone I'm sure has done this, said this before to themselves, how in the world did they get it? Like, how in the world did that person get an O visa? I mean, this woman is telling me it's so hard to get it, and they have to prove they're extraordinary, and they have to have work lined up in the US. And I know them. And I guarantee you they don't have work in the US. And I guarantee you they're not extraordinary based on what she's telling me. How in the world did they get it? Well, the truth is that there's a lot of people in the world that get it, that shouldn't get it. And a lot of it has to do with who's preparing the petitions for them and the avenues that they're taking. There's been a lot of fraud that's gone on over the years that immigration has caught, and it's really, slithered downhill to the poor artist that got caught in it. There was fraudulent letters that were done. The immigration caught an attorney back east doing, and all the visas that attorney did got canceled. There is attorneys and there's other people out there that will do fake media for you, fake work agreements for you. They'll do a lot of things for you to take your money and to get you that visa. Not all of them get caught. Not all of them, are denied. A lot of them get through. But the problem here is, yes, you get the visa in the end. But the problem is that when you go to renew the visa, that's a big issue. Because when someone comes to me that ended up in these kind of situations, they say, hey, Andrea, I need to renew my visa. It's 3 years. This other person did it. Can you help me renew it? I'm like, sure, let's do it. And I say, but I need a copy of original petition. So I get a copy of it and I start looking through it and I start asking them questions and like, oh, no, that's not really that. We just did that so I can get the visa. And I'm like, okay, so what did you do for 3 years? Not much. I was a waiter or whatever they were doing for 3 years. So the problem is that there's no way they're going to be able to renew that O, or it's going to be very hard to renew that O without maintaining this kind of fib that's been going on, this whole time. So I don't suggest ever that you file an O or a P or any kind of visa until you are ready to get that visa, until the opportunity has arisen and it makes sense for this is the time in your life that you should apply for these visas. Because to get a visa, just to get the visa, because the hopes of getting work in the United States is probably not the best avenue to do, especially in the world we're living in with the scrutiny that's on these applications. I've had clients even be told they file for a visa, they go to the consulate to pick up the visa, and they're claiming they're these big extraordinary people, and the consulate knows, like in the country that they are saying they're extraordinary, and the consulate's like, I've never even heard of you. And they've denied the visa, issuing the visa, even after immigration granted the petition, they will be denied the visa at the consulate. So you just want to make sure that you're ready for it. Remember that you have to be extraordinary, not in the US. You don't have to be extraordinary here. No one even has to know who you are in the US to qualify for these visas. You could be extraordinary in Australia only, like no one's ever even heard of you anywhere else. And that's enough to get the visa. Okay, so you don't have to prove extraordinary ability or extraordinary top of your industry or out internationally recognized in the US. You could be internationally recognized between Australia and New Zealand as a performing group. And that's international recognition. There's 2 countries and you are recognized in both. That is internationally recognized. So don't make it into something bigger than it is, but make sure it is the right time in your life to be applying for the visa. So that takes me to the question of how extraordinary do you really need to be to secure an O visa after we had that whole speech that I gave you. And I'm not going to go into the criteria with this. Like I said, I'm going to give you a link to that workshop at the very end with a discount. It's only $50 and there's like a 20% discount I'm giving you. It goes through every single criteria. So you want to pick that up. You want to do that to really get into the nitty gritty of exactly how extraordinary you have to be for an O visa to get an O visa. And what do you have to actually produce, like to show them physically, that you qualify for it. Okay. So you have to be extraordinary, but there's levels of extraordinary, and artists don't have to be as extraordinary as a scientist has to be. It's the lower level extraordinary. You have to meet at least 3 of the criteria solidly to get approved. I always do, and you'll hear me in the workshop, I always like to do at least 4 criteria in case an officer is having a bad day and doesn't like one. You're not kicked out and denied. They'll have an extra one to fall back on. But I would look at that workshop to go through exactly all the different criteria for the O visa. And then what if I can't qualify? And this guy is so cute. I love this little guy. Some people don't qualify. Some people are not ready, and I believe that in life, always remember that this is a process, just like everything in life is a process. And a lot of people have their hearts set on coming to work in the United States. It's a bigger market. They want to be here for those reasons. And I get it, but it might just not be the right time. And I believe that, when we go down past, and the ultimate goal is to get that visa in order to have access to a market that you want to work in, I get it. But sometimes you have to go over those pit stops and take those, side roads and do all these things in order to get where you need to be. But with knowledge, you have power, and the sense of, with information, you can then make sure that the steps you're taking over the next year or 2 years, or how long it's going to take you to get to the point to be able to qualify for the visa that you need and you want to be able to do the things in the US, it's going to be time. So you need to just make sure that you're patient with yourself and take the steps necessary now that you know what the steps need to be, or after you take that workshop, or after you learn more about the visas. Take the steps you need to take to make sure that you're doing what you need to do to get to the end. I tell clients, all the time, get a folder in your house. And I know this is old school a little bit, but I tell them, get a folder in your house, print out every single article, that you've ever been mentioned in, and put it in it. Every time you do a festival, make sure you keep the thing that lists you on that. Every time you do writing or recording, make sure that you get a letter from the person you recorded from, saying how amazing, extraordinary, how critical you were to their album or their single or whatever it is. So you want to constantly be thinking about the end goal as you're going through this process of getting to where you want to be. Okay. Also, like with P visas, I tell everyone all the time, take up a gig in New Zealand, and instead of just Australia, because then you have that international connection between the two countries. So, think about these things. And now that you have a lot more knowledge on them, or you're going to gain more knowledge on them, you have the power to be able to take the right steps and move in the direction. So ultimately, you will get what you need to get in order to enter the US market, if that's what you want to do. Here is an example of how the O visa workshop looks. If anyone is interested, I highly, highly suggest doing it. I put it together because I charge a lot of money to go through this one with clients. And I realize it's ridiculous, and people shouldn't have to pay that kind of money to do this. So I basically did all of that, and I just dumped it into my brain, into this workshop. And I basically go through with you detail by detail. It's not that long. I don't drive you crazy and going on for hours and hours. It's a couple hours. It has a worksheet, and it allows you to basically brainstorm and think by yourself on your own time what you need to fill the criteria for each thing. It's like I said, you need 3 at least. I always say to at least do 4, if not 5, unless you've won an ARIA award or been nominated for ARIA award. You have to get at least 3. So this allows you to understand clearly every criteria, what's required for the criteria, what are examples of things you could use, little tips and tricks that I use with clients to explain to them and to work with them on getting what's needed. What do the letters have to look like? Who should be the people that sign the letters? Everything, like what is the media? What kind of media? What are they looking for? All these things, what does critical and lead mean to an organization? Is an organization distinguished? All those things you need as in this workshop. And at the end of it, I also give you a discount on a one-on-one with me. So once you finish the workshop and you have your worksheet done, you can set up a one-on-one with me if you want. If you feel like, I don't know if I'm ready, I don't know. And we can talk through your worksheet, and we can see where you are and decide, should you then go for the O, or do you need more information or more details, or this is not strong enough, and we can do it. But anyway, this is the workshop. I think it's something that you should really consider doing. Here is the QR code, and there's the website that's on the bottom of the page. The coupon code is good for 72 hours to get an extra 20% off APRA O visa 20. It is only $50 or $49.99. So 20% off that is even less. I'm not going to do the math, but it's less. Anyway, so here's the QR code. Please, take advantage of it. It's only for APRA members, the QR code. So take advantage of it so you guys can get that extra information that I didn't cover in here about the details of all the criteria. Thank you all for letting me talk and give you all my information of doing this for so long. I really hope it was helpful. And I think now we can do some Q&A. I didn't want to close this, Nikki. So what do you want me to do? Because I want them to be able to get this QR code. I don't know.
I think it's totally fine.
Just leave it like this. Okay, we can leave it like this.
Yeah.
Then.
Andrea, that was fascinating. Glenn and I were both behind the scenes just messaging each other being like, this is amazing. I could barely keep track of the questions.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Well, everyone's going to have access to this, correct? Afterwards, they'll have access so they can go back and, because I know I talk fast and I was trying to get as much as I could in, so they can go back and rewatch it if they need to.
Yeah, no, it was great.
There's a recording that we can send to everyone. Yep.
Amazing.
But we do have questions. And as I suspected, Glenn and I were not able to handle many of them without you. So I'm going to jump right in. And there's some great questions too.
Hope I can give the answers. That's always a trick.
I think for most of them you will be able to. The first one was, are there requirements to have various vaccinations to apply for the O visa?
Not anymore.
Okay.
No. Vaccinations are only required when you do permanent residence in the US. And when I said not anymore, I was talking about the COVID, because COVID was for everything, the COVID vaccinations. But excluding the whole COVID, we don't want to even talk about COVID or bring up that horrible word. But no, there's no vaccinations required for non-immigrant visas.
Beautiful. Okay, that was easy. The next one is a little bit detailed. It is from one of our Kiwi friends. So I had a producer friend who had an MAF charge resulting in home detention back in 2018. He's a very talented producer and works for Billboard charting producers such as Hit Boy or DJ Mustard. What sort of process would he need to undergo in order to obtain the O visa in terms of references and that sort of thing?
Okay, I'm gonna be, what's an MFA?
An MAF, look, I think we're just going to make it more general in terms of if you do have a criminal record, yeah.
Okay, let's keep it general. So criminal records are extremely complicated. Extremely complicated. In fact, I don't really handle certain criminal records, DUIs and stuff like that. I will handle, and the reason I don't handle them, and just not to go into great detail and take up more time, because I can't really answer the question, is because every single situation that there's either just an arrest or an arrest and a charge, it's usually going to require a waiver, and it depends on so many details of what the crime is and what the charge is, and there's a lot that goes into it. So really, they need to talk to an attorney that deals with it's called inadmissibility charges, because he would likely be inadmissible to the US. So now he has to probably look into how he would have to file a waiver with his application to get it. So it's a very, very complicated situation when we have any kind of criminal charges, because it's just very complicated.
Okay.
So I don't have that answer.
No, that sounds totally fair. And I think always getting more advice is probably the best advice. So the next person asked several questions, and I thought they were all excellent. One of them I think you basically touched on, which was, what happens if my original petitioner, for example, a booking agent at the time when the visa is granted, changes during the 3-year visa period and a new tour gets booked? Do you have to do that reapplication, or is, because the visa already in place, is it covered?
If the original petition was just the booking agent as the petitioner, so if it was XYZ booking agent and they filed the petition for the artist to do this tour, and there was no other people that they were working for, it was just XYZ booking agent, then if the XYZ booking agent is no longer, then they have to do a change of employer, either in the US or and then they have to actually change over to the new booking agent to do the other work, because they can only work through the petitioner if it's a one employer.
Okay, all right. And then going on from that, if the first tour of the itinerary is postponed or even cancelled after the visa is issued, will the rescheduled tour require any amendments to the visa?
No.
Okay.
Once you have your itinerary, especially if you're touring and it's either through a booking agent or through multiple venue agreements, that it doesn't matter because they're looking at it as a whole. So if you were coming here just to do one show and that one show gets canceled, it's going to be weird because it's like you're only going to probably have a visa for that short period of time, so you're going to be stuck and have to do a new visa. But if it's just one of many that gets postponed or the date changes or it gets canceled completely, it's nothing. It doesn't matter.
Okay, well, that's good. Can you find out if your passport has been flagged when you're talking about the extra interrogation?
You'll know. You'll know if your passport is flagged. Usually you'll know because every time you come in, you'll feel like, why are they asking me so many questions? Why? Sometimes they'll send you, it's called a secondary in the airport. It's like another room that you have to go in and talk to another officer. You'll know usually. And if you don't know, it's okay too, because if you don't know and you're not getting all this questioning, then who cares if you're flagged, because it's not affecting your life at all. But usually if you're flagged, you'll know. And you'll know. And there's no way actually to confirm it because we have no access whatsoever to any kind of documentation from the Border Patrol. It's all under the cloak of sealing of, we can't see it. You can do a Freedom of Information Act request, which is a joke because they redact everything in their records. So you don't see anything anyway. So you don't know, but it's the kind of thing that you know if you know. And if you don't know, then it's good because you're probably not flagged. And if you're flagged, then who cares?
Fair enough.
That's the easy answer.
Can you change the dates of an existing visa while you're over there if you get offered additional work?
Yeah, you would file an extension of status.
Okay.
So let's say you filed an O visa and you got 2 years only or a year because you only had a year's work. And then all of a sudden you're here and then they start booking you like for another year or even 2 years. Then your petition would just file something called an extension of status, and they would just extend your status for the other work, and they would add in the other work.
Perfect. And how far in advance should you apply for the visa? Also, how long do they generally take to approve, to process it and approve it?
The earlier the better, but not too early. I've had people call me like a year in advance. I'm like, that's too early. You're very proactive. I would say now that things are slowly getting back to normal, and Australia is and even New Zealand, they're much more up to date in the consulates, and they're doing a lot of mail and stuff. So I would say about 6 to 8 months before. If you remember that there's this thing called premium processing in the US. So you file your application, your petitioner files your application in the US. It costs $460 for that application, but you can pay an extra $2,500, which is no joke, and you get an answer within 15 days. So what you want to do is, if you don't want to pay that $2,500, you do want to definitely file soon enough where you could have the luxury of waiting. Because remember, it's not just getting approved by immigration, in the US, you have to then go and get your visa. And like I said, nowadays, it's not as big of a deal because COVID's, thank God, in our past, and the consulates are speeding up. Plus, there's mail-in options too. So you're not going to be waiting forever for an appointment, but you want to leave yourself a lot of breath, especially if you have booked, tours and stuff. You don't want to be up against the wall and then be forced to pay the $2,500. But one more thing to know is that even if you choose not to do the premium processing, it's called, and pay the $2,500, you could always later add it. So I have a lot of clients will say, I don't want to do it. And I tell them processing, because we can tell kind of what processing is online. It's not a sure thing, but you can kind of see. And if it's taking 2 to 3 months to do an O visa, we tell them, okay, 2 to 3 months, you can do it. And then if we're approaching 3 months and they're having a nervous breakdown because they're scared that it's not going to be done, then they have the option of actually paying the $2,500 then, and tell them, speed it up. I'm not waiting anymore.
Fair enough. Okay. This one, I'm not sure if you will know the answer to. It was, how does it work with these types of visas and health insurance? Because we have an understanding that insurance over there is usually tied to employment. So if you've said you have multiple employers, do you have any insight on how that would work?
Well, usually when it's tied to work here, it's usually when you have like a traditional type of a job. Right. So if you're coming in and you're working for like, you know, a 9 to 5 kind of traditional job, a lot of times employers will offer you health insurance to go with, you know, as part of your salary or part of your package. Artists, I don't, you know, I could be, maybe I'll be surprised, but most artists I don't think are going to be offered in health insurance when they come over, especially if they're working for a booking agency. Maybe if they're a producer and they're working for a company that it's a more traditional role that they're going to be providing, they might have that offered. But I think a lot of artists come over with international health insurance. It's very expensive, and I'm not an expert on health insurance, but usually you're not going to get health insurance in the US tied to your work as an artist, unless you have a really nice situation.
Maybe travel insurance has to cover that one or something. Yeah. Okay, this one was asking about, can you get employment in a second job, like a day job, such as being a singing teacher or maybe even a graphic designer, whilst you're also doing the work that was tied to your visa application?
No, you can't. Like I mentioned, you can only work in the US based on what you were authorized to work as. So if you're applying, let's say, for example, as part of a performing group, you only can work as part of the performing group doing what you told the application you can do. So you can't take any side jobs. You can't do anything like that. Even if you have multiple employers, because remember I said when you have multiple employers, then you can add and you can do all these other things, but you can't do anything outside the realm, again, of what the actual visa allows. So if I'm coming here to do live performances, or I'm a writer and and I'm going to produce or whatever I'm going to do, I can't start teaching voice lessons, because that's not what you're extraordinary at. If you want another visa, you could apply for an O visa as a voice teacher. There are people that have multiple O's for multiple things, believe it or not. I mean, we have a lot of the entertainment industry that do that. Like they come in working for one production on one visa, and then they come in on another one working on another production. So it happens, but not with like usually voice teaching or doing, I know what they mean. They want it, extra income coming in while they're here.
Yes. Makes
sense, but you can't unfortunately do it.
Well, that basically answers one of our other questions there, which was, does the evidence only have to be for a single art form? Well, yes, it kind of sort of does, unless you were, as you were saying, applying for that producer, writer, performer, in which case you have to they have to provide evidence for all the different types.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So one question, we're nearly there. We're going to let you go.
Oh, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. I'm up now, so I have my tea. I'm perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. Is it more important to be significant or notable in Australia than in the US? So what if you were big in the US but not in Australia? Would that make any difference?
Honestly, for me, I don't give a damn. It doesn't matter. It's like, honestly, because that's why I tell artists all the time, because a lot of people think that the visa, they have to be big in the US. Like, you know what I mean? In order to get these things, I have to be big in the US. And it's like, how many artists, I mean, I'm not going to name names, but how many artists from Australia that no one in the world even knows who they are, and they are clearly clearly extraordinary. You know what I mean? Like, there's no doubt that they're extraordinary. So it doesn't matter that you're big here or there. If you're big here, like if you're that big here, that you're that, that you can meet the extraordinary, that everyone knows you in the US, then of course it might be easier to get the visa, right? Because it's like, I'm like Keith Urban. Okay, well, you can have a visa, but I'm just saying it doesn't matter. I think what's really important for everyone to really, really focus on is being and meeting the criteria at home, because I think that's the place where you're going to do it. I have a lot of artists too that say, I have all these gigs in the UK, or I have all these things here, but it's not going to help me with the visa. Yeah, it's going to help you with the visa. Because if you start charting in the UK and the US has never even heard of you, who cares? Because you're charting in the UK, you have commercial success in the UK, you have commercial success in Australia, you're set. I mean, you'll get the visa. So don't worry so much about the US. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter if you're big here or there, unless you're like so big here, like I said, then it makes it really easy to get the visa.
Sorry, put myself on mute there. This is very specific, but do you have an estimate on the time frame to go from the O visa to the green card?
There is no time frame. You can go directly to the green card. You don't even need an O.
Okay.
A green card to me, and that in that workshop, I go through in a lot of detail, but basically a green card is an O visa on crack. That's how I explain it to people. I mean, that's the easiest way to do it. So just because you qualify for an O does not mean that you qualify, it's that if then. So if you qualify for an O, you don't necessarily qualify for a green card. But if you qualify for a green card, you definitely qualify for an O. So a lot of people that are truly extraordinary that want to be permanent residents will just go directly for the green card. They'll skip the O. Because it doesn't take very long either. I mean, you self-petition, you don't even need a petitioner. You can self-petition. You need to have work in the US, like you have to show that someone wants to hire you. Somebody wants you here. And then you have to basically more or less meet the same criteria you would for the O, just, a little bit more, so it's like, the bar is, a little bit higher.
Sure. And in that, the work that you have to have lined up, is there a minimum amount that you have to have over there to be able to apply for a visa? Minimum amount of work.
For the green card or for the
let's say with the O and the P.
The O and the P, you just need to have work lined up for the period of time you want the visa.
Okay.
So if you want the whole 3 years of an O, you have to have work that's lined up for the whole 3 years, or they're only going to give you for the period of time you have it. That's why I was saying that if, it's really hard to book, 2 years, 3 years in advance. So it's kind of ridiculous. But what I say is fill it in with like recording and collaborating and press and writing that you could be doing, later on.
Wow. Okay. The questions keep coming. We really have to wrap it up, everyone. I really appreciate all of you being so involved. Some of these were covered in the presentation, so please look out for the recording that will be sent through. I'm just having a quick look in case there's one that really stands out. And someone has asked, is it difficult for people with disabilities to get the visas? Apparently Canada can be a bit touchy on people with disabilities or chronic conditions. Have you ever encountered?
No, because non-immigrant visas don't have any questions related to disabilities whatsoever. I mean, I'm trying to think if there's any question. No.
Okay.
When you apply for residency in the US, there's a lot more, you have to take a medical exam. There's a lot more involved. The non-immigrant visa, in my opinion, they're just the people that have the most issues are ones that have criminal records. They're looking for criminal records issues. But I can say, I'm trying to think, I can't say no. I've never heard of an issue or more difficulty for anyone who has any disability.
Great, good. And then a couple of people again have just asked about, if you've applied for the O visa as your outstanding talent, but you're doing remote work. I think we've probably covered that.
It's a hard one because I know it's hard. I mean, I know a lot of people are coming here and working, and it's a very expensive city, especially if you're in LA. It's and you want to make some extra money because your artistry sometimes will only take you so far financially in certain circumstances. So I get it, but try really hard not to do that. Yeah. And if you're feeling like you're only coming here, I tell clients that when we have heart-to-hearts, me and my clients, I try to tell them, if you're really coming here and you don't have enough work to really support you here, or you only have a few gigs lined up, be honest with yourself and think, is this really the time I should be going there? Like, is this going to be the most beneficial? Should I really invest this money and this time to go there now? Because maybe it's not the right time right now. Maybe it's better that I do a little bit more, get a little bit more contacts, get a little bit more, outside the US before I venture into that huge expense of going to the US. So something to think about.
Excellent. Thank you again so much. I'm sorry, I really am going to have to leave it there. People just keep going through. So I'm going to encourage everyone that still has questions and wants more information to grab the QR code that's there on the screen, enroll, have a look at the workshop. Andrea has been so generous with her time. Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm sure that people can reach out to you.
Thank you all for helping me. I love APRA. I've worked with you guys for years and years, and I'm always here for you guys. I think it's a challenging area to get visas to come to the US. I realize that it's expensive, it's challenging. Like Nikki said, take advantage of going through this. I tell you, this will give you everything you ever wanted to know, and then some about the visa, the criteria, qualifying. And in there, there's actually a discounted consultation with me. So if you really want, after you do the workshop and you really want to go and ask all these other questions or really go through the worksheet with me, there's a discount in there. Take advantage of that and set up a consultation with me. And then I'll go through it. You and me, we'll go through it over, Zoom and we'll see, we'll talk about it. And I'll answer all your other questions. So I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. So I'm here.
Fantastic. Thank you again. And thanks to everyone that's joined us online. I'm sure you found it as engaging as we did. There was absolutely no snoozing during that one. Have a fantastic evening, and hopefully we'll see you all at the next Insights webinar on the 7th of November, which is again about global export. So join us then. Thanks, everyone.